Hi, I'm Anne Pirvu,
And I'm Christopher Giroux, and we're the creators of Dr. Awesome Woman.
and this is the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Anne Pirvu and Christopher Giroux about their new comic book, Dr. Awesome Woman, from Vortex Comics. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Anne Pirvu is an actress and filmmaker known for her work in Little Girl in the Windows, Learning to Love Again, and Polly is the New Monogamy. Incidentally, Anne just received the 2025 Canadian Screen Awards nomination for Polly is the New Monogamy. Christopher Giroux's career spans a multitude of productions, genres, and over 50 feature films. A 2009 Sheridan graduate in the Advanced TV and Film program, Christopher moved quickly up the industry ladder, producing 10 back-to-back high-concept genre features with Black Fawn Films and Breakthrough Entertainment. In the fall of 2018, Christopher joined Vortex Media and is currently the Senior VP of Production. In addition to Christopher's production work, he's also a member of the Producers Roundtable of Ontario. He was awarded a Certified Fresh trophy from Rotten Tomatoes for producing Anything for Jackson in 2020, and has received 2 Canadian Screen Award nominations for his work on Christmas Island in 2023 and Take Me Back for Christmas in 2023. Together, he and his wife Anne created Dr. Awesome Woman. The story of Dr. Awesome Woman starts with a hero's journey in issue number 1. Dark forces crave the light, but Celine and her mighty team of galactic rangers are on a mission that will push her healing abilities to the limit in their attempt to save her home planet. The world needs more healers. So without further ado, here's my chat with Anne Pirvu and Christopher Giroux about their new comic book, Dr. Awesome Woman, from Vortex Comics. So Anne Pirvu and Christopher Giroux, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Thanks for having us.
Joy.
I appreciate your
John.
time. I know you both have busy schedules, but before we get going to all the questions, I would like to know, what was the first comic book you read? Now, maybe I'll ask Anne to go first.
Sounds great, but it's Chris's fault because he actually introduced me to comic books. He's a true diehard fan. And so my entry to comic books was the Watchmen graphic novel. I had probably one of the best introductions to the comic book world ever. So I loved it.
That is very popular. That's a good one. How about you, Christopher? What was your first one?
Yeah, I grew up a big Star Wars fan. So my introduction to them was these Star Wars kind of weekly comics that they used to kind of have. And they used to be kind of called Star Wars Weekly. And they had tales of Star Wars. And a lot of it was, gaps between the movie or scenes from the movie and things like that. And that kind of led me into the comic book world before really settling into the superhero genre. It was anything Star Wars, anything and everything Star Wars. And then that led me down a path to, the Amazing Spider-Man and Lobo and the Boys and things like that.
Nothing has changed since.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I do think that it's a lost sort of art, so to speak, the newspaper funnies. I remember we would get that on the Sundays, and I do remember those Star Wars comics you were talking about. And for a lot of creators that I talked to, that was their introduction. Before going to the newsstand, they would get it out of the newspaper.
Yeah.
That was great. So great stuff growing up. Wondering who or what inspires you to create today? And maybe I'll ask Christopher to go first.
Anne and I are both filmmakers, and I think at the core, we're both storytellers, and we look for different mediums to kind of tell those stories, and whether it's film or television or kind of webisodes, I think comics are still a very strong medium. So we look for ways to kind of just tell stories, and I think that a lot of the movies that I do are Hallmark Christmas movies. They're very grounded stories. And, a lot of the content that I watch are, horror movies and science fiction movies and larger films that have bigger stories. That what kind of led us to this comic book world was to tell a story that was bigger than the budget that we were able to kind of achieve. And this story kind of really started as a semi-movie, and it's sort of once removed kind of version. But just telling stories in different mediums, I think is super important to myself and to Anne.
Yeah, absolutely. And we love working together quite often. And I was going to answer your beautiful question with my husband inspires me the most. I really, truly believe that, because it's such a unique experience to be able to work with someone who genuinely shares your interests and understands the art form at the core. The art of storytelling, which, as Chris was saying, can be expressed in so many different ways, So we're both mega Marvel fans, and we are making movies together, and this started off as the seedling was an idea for a movie. And our partners at Vortex Comics were delighted at the actual comic book idea, because the movie is much more grounded. So the comic has this superhero feel and atmosphere and adventure and fun. And so they commissioned us to create a graphic novel based on that initial interest. And here we are today, releasing the first 2 chapters.
And for those not familiar about what we're talking about, this is your brand new comic book, Dr. Awesome Woman. So maybe you could give me sort of a elevator pitch, so to speak.
Yeah, Christopher, go for it. You're a genius at this.
Yeah, Dr. Awesome Woman really is a journey of self-discovery, I think at its core. The main themes and things are, about teamwork. And it's about a woman named Celine who lives on the Crescent Moon planet, who leads the Galactic Rangers. They're looking for 2 kind of powerful necklaces that can help protect their world. And on the Crescent Moon planet, everyone is born with a gift. And throughout their lives, their gift is kind of revealed to them, which is, semi-like a superpower. And the Galactic Rangers kind of protect the planet. And there's a lot of unrest due to some history on the planet. And Celine and her group of Rangers have to kind of figure out who the big bad villain is, who's been hiding in plain sight, and also protect the planet. But she's faced with a lot of grounded personal journey, kind of questions along the way about self-discovery and what it means to be a superhero. I think that a lot of the stories that Anne and I really reflect on are stories that are fantastical, but also really grounded in real human emotion. And, the book is really a combination of, I think, a lot of, the fantasticalness of doing things in outer space and having these real world scenarios kind of anchored in such a big way.
Totally. And Dr. Awesome Woman is a healer. That is her super ability. And that's something that to me personally was so important because, there's so many different kinds of superheroes out there. But I think that in terms of what we need more of in our world today is healers, emotionally aware people that lead with kindness. And we have a lot of layered messaging that kind of teaches, it's geared towards all audiences, young adults, younger kids, like anybody can read the comic. But the main messaging is about how to lead with kindness and what it truly means to be a hero and how hard it is to really do the right thing very often in life, And I think these types of positive messages is something that we could do more with in today's fast-paced and quite hot world. There's a lot of unrest surrounding us. So having tools and understanding ways to sort of deal with that in a productive way, I think is a very useful thing. And comics are an amazing way to open that up for a broad audience.
Absolutely. Yeah, that definitely comes through in the story. I was reading a bit of the preview copy that you had sent. I got to a certain point and went, oh, this happened. Well, that's a unique character trait to have for this title character. So definitely was a positive message there for sure. Now, you both are the writers on this book, but I'm wondering, you also worked with and collaborated with an illustrator as well. Wondering, how did you find this person to work with you?
I work full-time. My day job outside of, writing comics with my wife is making movies at Vortex Productions. Vortex started in the 80s as a comic book company, very famous for doing the comic Mr. X. And so we worked with Bill Marks, who is the owner of the company. And as we mentioned, we kind of pitched this as a movie, but not as the movie version of the comic. How it originally happened was we were pitching kind of a romance movie where she plays an on-screen kind of character and plays a superhero on TV and falls in love with a real-life hero who would have been a firefighter. And at the time when we were kind of developing the movie, myself and Anne and Bill were more interested in the comic book aspect than the romance story itself. And it sort of evolved into a comic book and kind of potentially some different projects down the road as well. But Bill had an idea. We're scheming behind the scenes to keep it going. And, Bill had an idea. He worked with this company called Line Art Studios, and they've been so fantastic to work with and have been really guiding us. This is our first comic as a couple and as an individual. So they've been really helpful along the way to guide us and help shape our characters. We had a very distinct vision kind of going in. So they were very flexible with, allowing us to kind of think outside the box. Sometimes we'd get the note by, that doesn't really happen a lot in comics. And we're like, that's okay. We're gonna do it anyways. And then other notes will be like, okay, no, we'll scale it back and stuff too. So it's been a very collaborative process between, Anne and I, between Lion Art Studios and Bill Marks as kind of our kind of guide through the process.
Definitely a collaborative process. Typically, when I talk to some creators, in some circumstances, they have the whole script written and they just throw it over the wall and say, go to it. But it sounds like there was a little bit of back and forth.
We're very, very hands-on creators down to the uniforms and the skylines and all that stuff. So, we wrote it, but we would send sketches and different comics and inspirations and mood boards and different colors and things that we'd find along the way. And, the whole graphic novel will be kind of 12 chapters and the first book is the first 2. So we were able to really dive in and kind of map out the story over the arc of the 12 issues, but to be really hands-on with the design and the characters and the colors and even how some of the frames kind of sit and drawn. But, Line Art Studios was really great with their collaboration, and obviously we wanted their input as well. So it was a real great partnership between us, them, and Bill Marks.
Absolutely. It was really key to call the comic book Dr. Awesome Woman. The character, Chris has this really amazing way of describing like a lot of epic male superheroes over time, like Superman and Spider-Man and like, all the man. And and outside of like Wonder Woman, not a lot of female superhero characters. It was very important to us to be clear in our messaging and to celebrate and empower, the Shiro.
No, it's very important. I know that there's some people listening who remember that one of the first superhero comic book heroines was Nelvana of the North, a Canadian, way back when. Yeah,
I love that. Yeah. I'm going to have to do some research, John. I did not know that.
So it's good that there's another one who's Canadian who's popping onto the scene. So that's great. That's great stuff.
Yeah, I think there's so many, as Anne was saying, obviously there's a lot of male and female characters throughout comic book history. But, the ones that we keep seeing kind of pop up in more modern day pop culture are characters like the Scarlet Witch and,
the Black
Widow. And this was really a celebration not only of being a superhero and what that means, but really anchoring it in being a woman and not having a code name that is something dark and mysterious. The themes of our film are, inherently light but grounded. I think that was very important where earlier on we got some feedback to kind of shorten the name. And I think keeping the name to a very fun title, but also, making sure that the name woman was in the title was always very important to us from day one.
Yeah,
that's great.
Absolutely.
So beyond talking to me on this podcast, I'm wondering what other ways are you going about to promote the book?
Oh, that's so amazing. We actually, working in collaboration with Vortex Comics, have reached out to several comic book stores in Canada, and we're hoping to collaborate with them to actually make the comic book physically available. More to follow. But outside of that, I find that we attend a lot of Comic Cons, and we are independent filmmakers at heart. And when you first introduce a new concept and you're bringing it onto the scene, right? I think word of mouth and personal effort, the highest results. So being able to talk to you right now is very exciting to us because we're hopeful that people that are in the know and interested in comic books will be able to spread the word. And outside of our enthusiasm and passion for the work, which we genuinely have, because we think that more content like this is important, and especially at a time when I think that Canadian creators are being encouraged and celebrated. You've got looming tariffs all over the place, and redefining our identity as Canadian artists has become a priority. And we're hopeful that through word of mouth and the support of wonderful people like you and comic book lovers across Canada, we can spread the word.
Yeah,
and lots of eyeballs on it.
To build on what Anne was saying, today has actually been a semi-press day as well. Anne was on CHCH Morning Live in Hamilton with the comic book, and we showed some pages live on the morning show this morning. We've also recorded a segment for Hamilton Life at Cable 14, and I have some other podcasts lined up. Anne's on Sirius FM radio next week as well, promoting the book and talking about some programs that Anne has kind of coming up. So, and we're big on social media. Together, we have quite a good social media following. And though my wife, who's an actress there, is better in front of the camera, I have also been in front of the camera shooting some videos and things like that on our social media to kind of promote the book. So we come from a background of always having to promote our art. I think, as Canadian creators, and as independent filmmakers, there isn't always a marketing team or a team to help with those things. So, we wear different hats and promote where and when we can. And as Anne said, we have a history of various Comic-Con and events and have some upcoming book signings and things like that we're excited for. But right now we're hitting the press tour and getting Anne and myself on as many podcasts and morning shows and local radio shows as we can as we launched. And the book just came out just last week. So it's been great to hear so much feedback on social media and things like that about people who have already placed orders and are excited for more.
Very humbling and beautiful to see.
That's great. So now that you've got Dr. Awesome Woman out, what's next? Can I ask, is there anything else down the road that you give a hint about that might be coming for readers?
Yeah, I would say that this is kind of more of the teaser kind of chapters to get it kind of, wet everyone's whistle and kind of introduce everyone to the characters. The plan is to release a full graphic novel. We'll have over 100 pages, 12 chapters. It's a great story, really complete story that really paints Celine's world, both past, present, and future. We've been working with the artists. We have over 6 issues complete, working all the way to that 12th issue. It'll be exciting. I would say in the next couple months, we'll have the full graphic novel out and available for readers worldwide to dive in. And it was always built to have more after that comic and graphic novel, whether that's more books and different formats of media, which is something that Anne and I are very passionate to see how well it translates in the comic book world and see how far we can take it.
Yeah, whether that be film or animation, we have some very fun ideas of how to expand on the story. So we'll keep you posted, John.
Oh, absolutely. But you can keep everyone else posted by telling us where people can find out more about you online and buy the comic.
Absolutely. That sounds amazing. So let's talk about the comic, because that's the center. So it is currently available worldwide on Vortex Comics on our Shopify page. And if you happen to want a little cheat sheet, Chris and I on our Instagram profiles have the link up there in our bios. So very easy and accessible. For me personally, I'm very active on pretty much all platforms, but especially Instagram @Pirvu.
My handle is @Christopher_Giroux. If you type in our names, we'll pop up. And as Anne said, the shop is in both of our links. We'll be continuing to promote it and get it out there for not just Canadians, but worldwide as well. So we're excited.
Great. Well, Anne and Christopher, those are all the questions I have for you. But I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
I think the main thing for us is touching base on what, Anne was mentioning earlier. Like, we're not only content creators and filmmakers and comic book writers, but I think we're big cheerleaders to Canadian content itself. It's Canadian Screen Week here in Canada, which is the Canadian version of the Oscars. It's the Canadian Academy selecting projects in film and television and web. Anne has a nomination for a lead role in a web program called Polly's the New Monogamy. But we're big promoters and cheerleaders of anything Canadian content, and whether that's you've written a book or you have a podcast or you've made a movie, we want to see it and we want to hear about it and we want other people to see it. And I think that we have such a unique opportunity with the world today to help other artists share their voices. And the best movies and stories have something so much deeper than what is sometimes just an action movie or a comedy. There's always so much heart or a moral deep inside. And I think in today's world, I think supporting other artists and encouraging other artists to write that script, to write that book, to make that movie, I think in today's age is so important. And obviously, check out Dr. Awesome Woman, but check out something you haven't read before by another Canadian content, or listen to a Canadian band that you haven't heard before. There's so many amazing Canadian artists out there today that are sharing so many unique stories and so many unique flavors. You know, you might not see that on Netflix. You might not see it on Apple Plus, but they're out there. And the more you search, I think the more you'll find. And just want to encourage everyone to do a deep dive and find a new Canadian band or a new Canadian artist or a new Canadian movie that you can rally behind and tell your friends about. It's always so cool when you get to discover something and show your friends and they say, oh, I've never heard of that. And now's the opportunity to do that and really, really search deep for cool Canadian artists who are creating cool Canadian art and help those artists get out there by just word of mouth and sharing with your friends.
Totally. And isn't it true that comic book lovers specifically are so versatile in understanding deeper levels of meaning? There's both visual, there's text. When I was introduced to the world of comics and I understood the diversity and the versatility of the messaging that you can provide, this is the exact type of audience that can appreciate exactly what Chris was talking about in terms of supporting just Canadian art in general. So you guys are amazing.
Thanks to Anne and Christopher for the chat. You can discover more about Anne Pirvu on Instagram at instagram.com/ANNPIRVU. And you can discover more about Christopher Giroux on Instagram at instagram.com/Christopher_Giroux. That's GIROUX. You can discover more about Dr. Awesome Woman at Vortex Comics and purchase the comic at Vortex Comics Store. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to the full conversations and discover even more insights with creators about making comic books and graphic novels. I also encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media sites, and you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2025.